Definitely, I'll look into if we can add additional words. I'm not seeing the same error when I'm trying it, but I see that it has 1,000-word limit, 1,000-character limit, I think.
Is that showing 1,000 for you or 1.000? Because that's
showing 1,000. Yeah, it's showing 1,000 for me. So.
Okay. Well, it says if it gives you an error, it says click on this, to look at what the problem is.
Yeah, I'm gonna try just submitting a
And that's what
dummy comment
happened.
here and see if I can get it to give me the error.
Okay.
And just so you all know, we are live streaming now.
All right, perfect.
Fantastic.
Ken, thanks
well,
for-
in that case, we should probably get started, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll defer to you. Tamara's gonna be joining us later on. I don't know if Dave caught you up to speed.
I heard from Tamara just before this that she wasn't going to be here until near the end. So, Dave, you're running us through a couple of chapters here of the comprehensive plan, I understand, for our agenda today, and we might as well get started. Looks like we've got most folks who we're expecting.
Perfect. Looks like we have Keith on camera now, so I'll be able to see him waving. Yeah, as long as I'm looking for it, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm more than happy to jump in. Let me do the share screen here. Hey, Bella, you want to give me screen
Yep.
sharing capability?
Yeah, my apologies. Okay, you should be good now.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
I think I determined what the issue is. So the comment box has both a minimum and a maximum. So you get the red error if you're trying to do a comment that's less than 25 characters, it won't accept it, and you can go up to 1,000. So I think that's probably to just avoid somebody giving a comment that's too brief, I guess would be the point. But I will see if we can change that or if we're kind of bound by the software.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be great.
That wasn't the problem I ran into. But we could talk about this maybe we should just talk about it in a private session after this or something.
And again, obviously, you can always, if you have comments, you can send them to me directly as well. So.
Okay.
But we definitely want it to work for the public. So.
Yeah, I'm just afraid other people might run into that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we are going to talk about, are you seeing the full screen of the presentation or are you seeing split screen?
Full screen.
I think it's full screen,
perfect.
yeah.
I want to make sure I pick the right monitor and you're not looking at the tiny version. All right. So today we are going to talk about just kind of hopefully quickly go through chapters 3 and 4 of the plan. As you know, there's chapter 2 talks about the plan principles, and we've talked about that more with the Planning Commission already. So in a sense, you've already kind of been briefed a little bit on chapter 2, but obviously please download the plan and be familiar with the whole thing. But we thought it would be really useful if we could kind of walk through chapters 3 and 4 and talk about some things that came out of our CPAC, our Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee meeting. And I'm glad Keith's here as well. He can chime in as we get into a couple of areas where they had some input on these sections. So chapter 3 is the land use and growth section. And the influencing factors in looking at this entire chapter, really we looked at the projected population growth, where we worked with the state demographer and their projections for the urban development boundary. So we actually gave them the boundary. They did their magic and determined that there's about 100,000 people within our current planning boundary. And based on a 1.1% growth rate per year over the next 20 years, we can anticipate an additional 24,000 people, making the entire growth boundary population of around 124,000 by 2040. So that's one of the influencing factors of this whole plan, the land use section. Obviously, we have our 201 sewer service boundary and the Persigo agreement that outlines requirements for annexation as conditions of development. The UDB, the 2010 comp plan established the UDB, as we all know, and the desire to try to align that with the Persigo boundary. We have modified the UDB with the 2020 proposed plan a little bit, not a lot, and I know we've talked a little bit about that previously. Influencing factor of housing supply and needs, looking at what are the housing needs in our community. We look back at the 2016 housing needs study. That's our most recent plan on housing that's been done. We're looking at redoing a new housing needs study for 2021. But we looked at 2016, where is, what's the adequate attainable housing needs? Is there undersupply in some price points? What type of housing types are the community in demand for? So that obviously was a big influencing factor. We looked at commercial and employment gaps and needs. The plan provides a broad mixed use land use category. This creates areas for both employment and housing to provide areas where neighborhoods can access services. And then the whole aspect of balanced growth. And when I say balanced growth, the plan envisions future growth will be both one, infill and redevelopment, and two, greenfield development. So really listening to the community and that their desire to not just sprawl to the book cliffs, to try to really have more compact development, more infill and redevelopment, but also knowing that there's a demand for new housing and new neighborhoods, and so there's greenfield development growth as well. Part of that is somewhat of an infill in some areas where you have a field that's surrounded by existing urban densities, and others would be right on the edges. So we really looked at trying to minimize our leapfrog type development that we've seen so excessively used here in Grand Junction over the last 30, 40 years. So this chapter introduces a map called, it's actually got a new title now, but it's looking at growth tiers. This is an older version, but no changes in the boundary. But this particular version helps kind of show the three tiers that we're looking at. Tier one is the urban infill. It's that kind of beige area on this particular map. Areas where urban services already exist and generally meet service levels, usually within existing city limits, where the focus is on intensifying residential and commercial areas through infill and redevelopment. There's the tier two, which is kind of the lighter green. Areas within the existing UDB and 201 that are urbanizing or proximate to urbanizing areas. Annexation is appropriate for new development and redevelopment in the tier two areas. It discourages kind of the annexation of existing under less developed neighborhoods in the county that would require huge upgrades to urban services. And then tier three is an outward growth tier. Its areas, that's the dark green, areas include rural and larger acreage properties not currently served by urban infrastructure and prioritized to stay rural for the 20-year planning horizon. So again, looking at one of the influencing factors of population growth, it was determined that we have an abundance of land that can be developed and provide areas for our growth for the next 20 years without having to leapfrog and expand out into these areas. Basically in the north, beyond or north of 8.5 Road, and in the central Orchard Mesa area, kind of east of 30.25 Road. So the idea being that we're not suggesting shrinking the urban development boundary to exclude these areas, but really more preserve them for beyond the 20-year planning horizon. Or if all of a sudden we turn into a St. George, Utah, and we start growing a lot faster than 1.1%, we would need to reevaluate and update the plan and probably incorporate some of these tiered areas into tier one. The land use map, land use plan in the current 2010 comprehensive plan, we call it the future land use map. We've changed the name a little bit by taking out the word future. It's the land use map. And this particular map is probably the most, it's probably the hot map in the plan. There's a lot of people that will turn to this page probably first and want to know what's going on around them. And it's obviously pretty important as we try to guide the future growth and development of the community. So this section describes the 9 future land use categories. Previously, we had our current plan, we have 22, so we reduced from 22 to 9. You might also remember, or know, I know you all know that we have the blended map on our current comprehensive plan. So here we have 22 categories and a blended map with 3 residential densities. So we're suggesting reducing all that into 9 categories. Each land use category looks at range of density, specific characteristics of the land use category, primary and secondary land uses permitted, and what the implementing zone districts are for each of those 9 land use categories. So I'm going to just kind of run through some of these. You can see that we'll talk more about this here in just a moment, in the next couple of slides. Now, one thing that helps to kind of better understand the framework of the land use plan is if we look at it in relationship to the growth tiers map. You can see that the tier 3 areas, the areas that are really set apart for, dedicated for future growth beyond the 20 years, are also shown primarily on the future land use map as rural. And so basically they're honoring existing county zoning. Those areas are primarily zoned RSFR in Mesa County as a result of them being in the urban development boundary and under the city's long range planning. There's a couple exceptions out by the airport where where it would be not residential, but more commercial or industrial. But the areas that are more rural or residential uses, it would be the rural residential. The range of density is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres, which corresponds with the residential rural zone district. And the land uses are primarily residential, agricultural operations, open space, those kinds of land uses. So looking back at the future land use map, so we've just talked about one of the 9, the rural designation. Now, this map or this slide showing us the residential land uses. And so I added the 4 other land use categories that would help implement the plan as far as residential land uses. So we have residential low, residential medium, residential high, and then mixed use is both residential and non-residential. But I'm going to talk about it here with the residential uses. So residential low, and this is the range of density is between 2 and 5 point dwelling units per acre. The primary land uses are residential and accessory dwelling units. And the secondary land uses are open space, parks, schools, places of worship, home-based businesses, public institutional uses, and other complementary neighborhood uses. Some of the characteristics of this category are it's comprised of residential uses with varying housing types and lot sizes. It provides a transition between less developed edges of Grand Junction and the denser urban areas toward the city center. This is where we had a really good discussion with CPAC. A previous draft looked at residential lows being from 1 to 5.5 dwelling units per acre, which under that scenario would suggest that the implementing zone districts would be R1, R2, R4, and R5. CPAC was had a good discussion and came up with the approach that we should take is to, in an effort, and a little backstory, in an effort to really focus on being in the urban business as a city and not promote, in a sense, large lot residential development that is similar in nature to what is happening out in Mesa County, outside the sewer boundary, like 1 acre lots. We really probably shouldn't. The thought was maybe we shouldn't be promoting that by allowing for those kinds of densities in the residential low. And that if we're going to really try to stay as a community that promotes more intense development, that's urbanizing, that's urban, that has all the urban amenities, the sidewalk and street lights and other city kinds of services, that perhaps we shouldn't be in the more rural or state kinds of land use decision making, and let that be somewhere else in Mesa County. And so as a result, from the committee's discussion, we actually raised the density range from 2 to 5.5, and also the implementing zone districts moving from R1, R2, R4, and R5 to just R4 and R5. So Keith, I know you want to jump in and kind of talk a little bit about your perspective from that discussion.
Well, I think you framed it pretty well, Dave. And the element that came up was to not go ahead and do away with R1 and R2 from the zoning standpoint that would cause this mass requirement of rezoning existing if we just somehow eliminated it, but using the comprehensive plan to say essentially that within the urban growth boundary, we really need to be planning for urban and suburban densities out there. And so the emphasis there was to not create a plan that promoted or encouraged further development at that R1 and R2 zones. And so by doing so, it wouldn't eliminate or cause issue in those areas that density exists, but it didn't give a developer the ability to go in and create 1 and 2 acre lots that or 1.5 acre lots that would be very challenging for infill and growth in the future once that tier was appropriate to have that urban and suburban growth that that is identified within the urban growth boundary. And I think that's the emphasis. And I haven't found it yet, David. Maybe you can help point it out to where the flip side of just putting this in the mapping is also to not let it be cemented in the foundation that these areas will forever be rural. It needs to be called out that we're doing this as part of the tier 3 to respect our current conditions, and yet still recognize that towards the end or at some point here as we continue to grow out that way, that those rural residential will in fact be appropriate for this comprehensive plan to change that into more of a urban and suburban sort of growth.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, well, part of the definition of the tier 3 or the outward growth says areas predominantly characterized as rural and large acreage properties not currently served by urban infrastructure and that are prioritized to stay rural for the duration of the 20-year planning horizon to promote more focused development activity in tier 1 and tier 2. So yeah, it's a medium term kind of prospect. I mean, some might call it long term. For me, I've been here 30 years, 20 years doesn't seem very long. So it's all relative, right? In the sense of how long 20 years is. But when I look at all the growth that's happened in 30 years, I think, well, 20 years is zip by faster than you think. And we'll probably be ready for those areas then, but we're not ready now.
So
Dave, can I ask a question?
Sure.
It looks to me like there's kind of a gap between residential low and rural, because residential low, you have to have at least 2 homes per acre, 2 dwelling units per acre. And then rural, goes all the way, it starts at 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. So there are some properties that just physically would fall well between those 2 points. And where would those fall in? How would those be categorized?
So they would be, I think it would be a situation where they would be a kind of an as-is situation. So as Keith had mentioned, the desire is not to eliminate the R1 and the estate zone districts from the city's zoning map or the municipal code. But that as we look at new development, to really implement the vision of the comprehensive plan for 2020, not to settle for lesser densities, because we're just propagating the continuation of sprawl in the sense of larger lot within our UDB. That doesn't mean that, I mean, Mesa County has a number of 1 acre lot subdivisions that are just outside our urban development boundary. So those areas, I mean, the county is doing what the county does. And so that doesn't mean that the community wouldn't have new 1 acre lots somewhere in the Grand Valley available. We're suggesting that within the confines of Grand Junction, that we need to be more responsible in providing that urban suburban growth model rather than a larger lots subdivision. Keith, I don't know if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I understand the principle, but there are, especially when you get out in the Redlands, there's a lot of properties that just on a physical basis can't accommodate that kind of density.
Well, and if that's what you're worried about, we have lots of options. We have lots of standards in the development code that will allow us to exclude properties that are undevelopable.
Okay.
So you can take out wetlands, steep slopes, any other kinds of topography or things that are going to not be developable that we could remove from the size of the lot to look at the density requirements. And we do that now. In order to meet minimum densities, oftentimes the development will exclude those areas that are undevelopable, and they're still meeting minimum density because even though it looks like you've got large lots around you. So that it doesn't take away from that. It just means it would be done under an R4 or R5 rather than an R2. That makes sense? Okay.
More or less.
All right. It's definitely a change. I found it exciting. It was something that came out of our committee meeting. It wasn't something that staff initiated or came up with the idea. It just kind of came out of the discussion. And at first I was thinking like, we can't do that. And then I realized, no, we can do what we want, the community wants, right? So I like the idea personally. I think it's being responsible in trying to show where growth needs to occur and not continue to sprawl the entire Grand Valley. Anything else you wanted to add, Keith, on that?
No, I think that's essentially it. I did want to plug in a comment, Dave, and since Josh is on the line too, I wonder if we need to visit, in order to, in the tier 3 areas, if we need to visit how clustering provisions or things of that nature would impact that and potentially be counter to the intent of making sure that those lots don't get broken down in such a manner in this short-term time that impedes our ability to develop in the future when it's appropriate at more of the urban and suburban densities.
Yeah, I think we can handle that through implementation for sure, and definitely with the code as we review a development application and making sure that we're not limiting ourselves in the future to meet the intent of the comprehensive plan. All right, any other questions on that? I wanted to spend a little bit of time because this is definitely something a lot different than what we've talked about before.
Guys, page 60, if you download that plan, page 60 does a good job of identifying what the implementing zone districts are and the characteristics of each of these categorizations too. Dave may not have been able to put them all on the slide and show it all together. So there's a lot there.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. That exactly. Make sure you look at that section because it does have all the detail. And you're right. I only put a few. I only placed a few of the words on the slide that came out of that section. So now we have residential medium, which is 5.5 to 12 dwelling units per acre. And then residential high, which is greater than 12 dwelling units per acre. I did have our GIS just look at the acreages for each of these categories. So looking at, I just got this late yesterday. So looking at the rural residential, there's about 3,700 acres. That's about 11.8% of our UDB. Residential high, we have about 640 or so acres. It's only a 0.2% of our total area. Residential low is about almost 9,000 acres, about 28% of our urban development boundary. And the residential medium is about 3,700 acres, or about almost 12% of our growth area. We'll have we're doing an analysis to kind of look at those numbers compared to what we have today. I don't have our current 2010 plan numbers, but we'll have that in the future for everyone, anybody that really likes to look at stats to kind of see how we compare between 2010 and 2020. The fourth area on this slide, land use category, is mixed use. And the range of density is greater than 8. And the primary uses are non-residential, like commercial, retail, and employment. And then residential, but on the higher density, well, 8 or more. And we've increased the amount of mixed use areas because this particular land use map does not have what the 2010 map had, which is the neighborhood centers and the village centers. So we removed all those and made it more parcel based in the sense of creating some mixed use areas that make sense to provide services near other existing neighborhoods and future neighborhoods.
Dave, this is Christian. Are there still going to be mixed use corridors?
There's not. We're not proposing the mixed use opportunity corridor that we currently have in the 2010 plan, but we've identified on a map. It's not on this map that you have in front of you, but on a map that shows a number of neighborhood center potential locations, and they're generally on those same corridors that you saw for the mixed use opportunity corridor that we currently operate under. So in a sense, we substituted it with that type of an approach.
So if I'm on North Avenue or Patterson or 29 Road, can I rezone to mixed use?
Let's save your question because we're gonna have
Okay.
a slide here that shows those corridors.
Okay.
All right, looking quickly at the non-residential land uses, we have 4, in addition to the mixed use one that I put on the other slide. So there's commercial, which is does allow for residential for 16 or more dwelling units per acre under some of the zone districts like C1. There's industrial, which is primarily, really the industrial is protecting the industrial. It's really looking at light and heavy industrial, manufacturing, processing, assembly, warehousing, distribution, and outdoor storage. And so we've identified, looking at the numbers of acreage, almost 3,000 acres of industrial in the community. And it's, in a sense, we're protecting it even more so as industrial, where the current plan, a lot of it is commercial industrial. And as a result, it has a tendency to start sliding more into commercial rather than industrial uses. And so I think by making this more precise, as in commercial versus industrial, we're going to provide the community a better plan. And then the last category is parks and open space. If you look at the acreage, there's a ton of acreage for parks, but a lot of that's because of the state parks and all the river area. Let's see, about 5,000 acres, 16% of the land area. But again, we're promoting outdoor recreation, right? So our comprehensive plan is showing between the river and the Three Sisters area, and then of course all the parks that we have. That's all adding up to about, what did I say, 5,000 acres of open space or formal park space. Any questions on this slide before we move on?
Dave, I just wanted to make one comment. And the acreage and the data is great to be able to use for reference. And when we look at the 3,000 acres for industrial, it's worth keeping in mind that industrial uses, especially with those kinds of uses for the job targets that we are currently seeking through GGEP and other efforts, they need to be 1 to 3 acre lots very often, and oftentimes even bigger. So occasionally a half acre lot is sufficient for industrial use, but not very often. So that's the one part of that statistic list that the industrial acreage may seem like a lot, and yet relative to cities like say Boise, Idaho, or some of these others, that the industrial parks, it's not as much as it might look just from that data point. So it's really important to keep what we got.
Absolutely. All right. Chapter 3 also talks about servicing growth and has discussion on some level of service targets. So the slide here kind of just briefly talks about them. There's 11, I believe, if I counted that right. So everything from water, with a target to make sure that the water supply is there for domestic use and fire protection when development occurs. Wastewater on the wastewater connections to the sanitary sewer system as a requirement, and obviously as a community we need to construct wastewater infrastructure. Flood control and storm drainage, making sure we're managing the floodplain and the drainage infrastructure. Transportation, local street safety improvements by the developer, as required by the developer to build the local streets and provide the safety improvements. And then anything that's more regional, expanding those roads to collector, arterial, whatever, that portion would be constructed and paid for by the city. Transit, looking at transit long-term needs, expanding the facilities to meet future demand. Police protection, their goal is to achieve uncommitted officer time of 37%. So that's really our level of service target for them. Fire protection, their level of service target is to provide adequate fire protection in 4-minute response times for all areas of the city. Other utilities in our community, obviously many of them are not city-based in the sense of the city government, but hopefully each utility develops new or expands facilities based on its resources and needs. The school district at D51, public schools are obviously important to our community, making sure that they develop new and expanded schools to meet student demand. Mesa County libraries. Libraries are a really important part of our community and allowing for the programs that they have to be available to everyone. And so the plan talks about libraries. And then parks and open space. And really the service target would be that most residents will live within a half mile of a public park, which is basically a 10-minute walk. And that's also being looked at as part of the PROS, the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Master Plan that's under planning right now with Parks and Rec. So hopefully the Planning Commission, you've seen a little bit of that and we're getting involved in that effort as well. Any questions on levels of service, targets, and the servicing growth? Again, this is just a quick overview of that plan, of that section within Chapter 3 of the plan. All right, moving on. So looking, that's Chapter 3. So you had the tiers, growth tiers, you had the future land use, or see, I'm going to be saying future land use forever now. The land use plan, and then you had the area of servicing needs. Now we jump into Chapter 4. Any questions on Chapter 3 before I head into 4? All right, hearing none. So chapter 4, you can see the diagram here on the screen. It's divided into very specific policies include well, chapter 4 includes area-specific policies, and that also includes the sub-areas. And we'll talk about those here in a few minutes. And Christian, in this area-specific policies, we'll have some maps here that you can ask your question on.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So the plan principles, we have the land use designations of commercial, industrial, and mixed use. And under each of those, there's additional sub areas. So under commercial, we have employment center, regional center, and corridor policy areas. Under the industrial, we have airport services and rail. And then under mixed use, we have 5 sub areas: corridors, riverfront, neighborhood centers, university district, and the downtown district, or 4. And area-specific policies guide the desired use, characteristics, and form of development in specific locations within the city. That's that first bullet. The second bullet, the policies and recommendations apply to specific areas within these 3 areas I just talked about. And additionally, this chapter, as I mentioned, includes the 2 sub-areas which we'll talk about. So there's kind of an enlargement of that area, of that graph. Moving on here. So the area-specific, commercial area-specific policies, there's some area-specific design principles that go along with the commercial area in the plan. They include principles such as mix and relationship of uses, circulation and access to sites, building form and character, the streetscape, transportation modes, and relationship to surrounding areas. So you can see on this map, it identifies the regional center area, which is the area that's outlined by this, I'm all colorblind, but I think it's green, a green line here. It shows Mesa Mall, some areas here across from Canyon View Park on 24 Road, as well as the northeast corner of the intersection of 24 and I-70. It also shows,
yellow.
Is that yellow?
Yep.
Thank you. So the yellow, they're highlighted by the yellow outline. Also the yellow area here showing the Horizon Drive area. And then kind of a future area for the 29 Road interchange area as being a regional center area that's identified for our community. There's also employment centers that are identified here kind of in the purple or pink. You can see some areas here around St. Mary's as being a large employment area. You have community hospital out here on G Road. Also, the areas of kind of Crossroads Boulevard up here off of Horizon Drive. And then we have the commercial corridor areas, which is partly what you were talking about, Christian. Identifies the Highway 50 corridor in Orchard Mesa, the area here on North Avenue, the 6 and 50 corridor out towards the mall and even towards the interstate, and parts of Patterson Road. Oh, the other employment center is the Forsyth Park. It's been identified. So that's the commercial area. As I jump to the next one, you'll see it's the mixed use area. And this is the map that shows all of the neighborhood centers. So all these little circles that a lot of the various intersections are areas that we've identified as neighborhood centers. Again, taking the place of the neighborhood center, village center concept that we have in our current 2010 plan. This shows the downtown core area and the mixed use corridor areas. And so you've got some mixed use corridor areas of South 7th Street, as well as North Avenue here between I-70B and the University District. As well as D Road or Riverside Parkway out here, the old, well, it's the Mesa 29 Road and the Riverside Parkway and D Road. It includes the property owned by CMU as well as the state home property, and just along the both sides of 29 Road between D1/2 and just south of D Road. So a little more than a half-mile stretch there. The University District, we've identified the University District within the plan and talk a lot about that and the importance of that district and its relationship with downtown and connections with downtown and also connections with the riverfront. And then the third area specific is the industrial, identifying again with a list of design principles like the other two have or similar to, but identifying these as important areas to preserve for industrial land use, as well as the airport area that's been highlighted as well. And then the rail. So when you look at what's available for railroad spurs in our community, we have spurs out here in the Railhead Industrial Park out here close to 22 Road Interchange. There's some spurs here just kind of east of Bananas off the Parkway. And then also down here along the Parkway, just by the 5th Street area, and then as well as basically lower downtown, we have access to rail. And in this planning process, it came out pretty strong, the need to try to preserve our rail access and not allow that to go away. It's very difficult to get new rail access with the railroad. And so we want to make sure we preserve what we have and really identify in this plan and make sure that people know where it's at and how to get to it. And those developments, that development that needs that rail access, hopefully we can find ways to get them close to it in the coming years. Any comments or questions on any of those three maps? All right, we're going to jump to the sub areas then. So the sub areas, as you might remember from our planning with HLA and the public about a year ago, we were looking at the sub areas and planning for those. We had the 24 Road corridor sub area and the lower downtown sub area. So this map identifies those two areas that were under consideration. And you'll find in the plan, if you haven't seen already in that section, there's this slide here showing 4 pages from the plan for the lower downtown sub area. It looks at the character of the area, some of the functional improvements that would be helpful as we further plan and develop the area. It has a list of various opportunities, really. Railroad crossings and we have pedestrian crossings, the priority of our complete streets policy that the city has, streetscape and activation. And then there's an opportunity site, which is identified also in this sub area. And then the lower slide here is the lower downtown catalyst site. Again, this is not saying that this is exactly how this property, which sits at the corner of 7th, the southwest corner of 7th and Riverside Parkway, has to develop. But this is what could happen under all of this planning principles and options here. So actually, this is just recently sold to a new owner, and Mike Foster, who's on our CPAC, had shared it with them, and they think that actually was a positive nod on what they saw. So not that they're going to build this, but it was good to hear that at least a new owner liked some of the ideas and concepts that are being presented in this catalyst site. Any questions on the lower downtown?
Hey, actually, yeah, Dave, I had one question there. The streetscape active, you know what I'm saying? It's on,
Activation.
that's it. It's shown on 8th Street instead of 7th Street. And I couldn't recall if that was, deliberately done, or it seemed like 7th Street really was targeted as the main corridor there, but what triggered the 8th Street activation?
And that, it may just be a mapping situation that we didn't catch, but it should be 7th Street. So you're suggesting that on,
I'm sorry, it's actually on 9th Street instead of 7th Street.
well,
On
9th
that-
Street, now 7th Street, actually it's both 7th and 9th. It shouldn't be 8th though. 9th Street is a secondary, more pedestrian bicycle friendly than, well, I should say more bicycle friendly. 7th Street is bicycle and pedestrian, but there's a lot of people that find 9th Street as being a good way that links them to lower downtown. So that came out in that planning effort to try to really establish both corridors as bikeable. So we definitely wanted to activate 9th Street as well for some of that multimodal connection. It doesn't take away from the mixed use desire for 7th Street, and activating the street with the new development, construction of buildings, and existing sidewalk and the bike lane that's already in place, and other kinds of street level improvements that we can make in the future for that area. Any other comments or thoughts? We'll jump to 24 Road. So similar kind of thing, you'll see a series of pages that look at the character of the area, the functional improvements, and then a catalyst site. And in this particular area, again, 24 Road is going from basically Mesa Mall, anchoring the south end, and Canyon View Park, anchoring the north end. And you'll see that the 24 Road catalyst site is the Usher property that sits there on the southeast corner of G Road and 24 Road. Again, this is just concepts, not something that's cast in stone as far as, well, we got to build it like this, but this is showing what could occur that would bring in all these elements that have been discussed and talked about as part of the functional improvements in the character of the area, and trying to preserve Leech Creek as an amenity with trails and pedestrian bicycle access, and all the kind of outdoor amenity that it provides as a linear kind of park system. So any thoughts on this particular one? I encourage you to read through the plan document in detail on both these sub areas, of course. All right, let's see. So how long did I take? Almost an hour. All right, so next steps. Wanted to make sure that you were aware of our next steps. So we have a couple of, we have 3 different public events happening next week. On the 10th, we'll have a virtual open house from 6 to 8 p.m. We had sent, I think you all received from Tamara an email showing the links to be able to know what that link is to be able to participate in that open house or community event. That's from 6 to 8 on Tuesday to 10. Then on the 12th, which is Thursday, we have a noon kind of drop-in. People can drop in and ask questions, virtual open house. It'll just last that hour. Our consultant team will be on available at both those open houses. And then the evening of the 12th, even in this crazy pandemic COVID world we're living in, we're working towards, and right now it's scheduled. We hope we don't have to cancel at the last minute, but an open house at Grand Junction Convention Center, formerly known as Two Rivers. It's an in-person, in order to try to minimize the risk of having too many people and not being able to social distance properly. We've limited to 30-minute sessions, asking people to sign up for a session. starting at 4 o'clock, and then the last session would end at 7. I know some people have already signed up for like 2 sessions in a row. I guess some leave only more than 30 minutes, and that's fine. We're just trying to minimize the number of people at the convention center at the same time. We're trying to keep it to about 25 people at the most at any one time. So please sign up as well, so that way you know what slot is available for proper social distancing purposes. And we really encourage you to come and just kind of hear what people are saying and check it out. But if you can't, obviously you can do the virtual, and you don't have to feel like you have to attend all of them. You can, but it would be nice to at least check out one of them. We encourage you to do that. On the 16th, which isn't on this list, there's a city council workshop that doesn't involve planning commission. It does involve Keith as a representative of CPAC, and Andrew, I believe you got an invite from Chandler on that as well, right? I think Andrew's going as well. So just 2 people from planning commission are being asked to attend that. That's on November 16th. And then coming up following week, we have, or that same week of the 16th, we're planning another workshop with you at your regular November 19th workshop, kind of a noon to 1:32, however long we need to take. We'll talk about chapter 5 in the matrix and any other plan topics that you want us to cover. So chapter 6 is the appendices. So it's a bunch of maps and some narrative. Chapter 5 is a really important one we want to go over with you on it. You'll find right now that chapter 5 is just the skeleton of the chapter, and staff is working on the meat of it with our department directors. So you haven't seen that yet. In fact, our CPAC hasn't seen it yet either. But we want to talk about that on the 19th with you. And then we're hoping that all goes well, that the community love this plan, and we're ready to move forward with adoption December 1st for recommendation by you all, and December 16th, a final hearing with City Council, hopefully adopting the plan and replacing our 2010 plan with the 2020 plan. So any thoughts, questions, feedback? Let me unshare and get back to the main screen here. Let's see, how do I do that? Hey, Bella, you on there, online?
Yeah, one moment. Oops, wrong one. Dave, you might have to turn your camera back on, sorry.
Okay. All right, I'm back. Okay, Andrew, or a member of Planning Commission, any more comments or questions for me? Otherwise, we can send it back to you, Andrew.
Well, it doesn't look like we've got too many folks with questions, so I think that pretty well covers what we have on our agenda for today, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right. Well,
All right.
hearing no further questions or comments that anyone wants to share with us today, I suppose we'll be back together at our next scheduled event. And Dave was nice enough to go over that schedule for us just now, so we should all be ready to go.
Really appreciate all of you attending today. It really helps if we can, get you up to speed on the plan now, and so we're not having to give you the whole sermon at the end, because it's a long document, obviously. So.
Well, and on my side, I appreciate being able to take a bite at a time and kind of get your feedback on, what your thought process was during the plan, and just right now off the top of my head, I like the way that it's it seems so much more streamlined and consolidated, and really, I think it's going to be user friendly. So thanks for the help on that too, Dave.
Yeah, you bet.
You know, Dave, I do have one other comment that I just feel compelled to plug in whenever I can. So forgive me if you hear this over and over, but to do the tiered thing that we're looking at, we've really been focusing on what's happening on those outer edges, right? Because we've really had a lot of public feedback or organized feedback, I should say, from those areas. But to make that happen, that was premised on the data that came back that said the infill or underutilized areas that exist kind of more in our core could in fact absorb a lot of our anticipated growth. And that was a big shifting point in the conversation there. But with that shifting point came the next discussion of, okay, great, then how do we get people to actually develop in those areas? Because they're so often burdened with either some sort of existing conditions or tying in. And so on that tiers map, along with the three colors of shades of green, there's a blue line for incentives that really identifies those cores where the underutilized areas can in fact be there. And while that discussion of actual implementation of that hasn't really been had, it certainly points towards a picking of the scab at the very least, and if not, peeling the Band-Aid off for the fees conversation that we all just went through. And the success of this comprehensive plan, from my 2 cents and my perspective, largely hinges on ensuring that we revisit, and as a planning commission and city council and staff, how to incentivize that infill development, because the limited fee reductions and whatnot that exist right now are evidently not enough. And so we'll have to revisit those. And I think that's what will be our burden to make sure happens in order for this plan to be successful.
Good. Yeah, good point. I appreciate you bringing up the what we call the intensification area of downtown or whatever. I skipped over that. It was on the slide, but I didn't talk about it. And that is an important area of where we want to really concentrate growth and try to incentivize it. So it's an incentive area. And I'm with you. Right now we have incentives for the TCP, but is there things out there that could be thought about and implemented? All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. We appreciate your presentation.
You're welcome.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you at the next one.
All right. Have a great day.